So, what are some of the challenges to producers? Well, of course, overproduction, which ultimately stems from the contradiction in the structure of the economy that producers never resolve despite the current success. We always fall into overproduction. Even when we're doing just-in-time production strategies, it's ultimately predicated on overproducing something. And then, of course, the crisis of underproduction, which also stems from the contradiction where producers find themselves undermining the same social and environmental relations that make their production possible in the first place. So, overproduction, underproduction, how do we get it just right? I don't know if there's an answer to that. I think part of the answer should come in our individual tendencies to consume less. We can ultimately drive the markets down. Talking about underproduction, there's a treadmill of underproduction where the efforts of producers to respond to declining production leads to even greater production declines through the destruction of overworked productive capacity. A great example of this is commercial fishing. Due to overfishing, just about every one of our estuaries worldwide, what we've seen is a response from fisher folk who understand that if you continue to overfish, you're ultimately not going to have any fish to fish. So they've decided to regulate themselves. And in an attempt to address overproduction, they are instituting rules that force underproduction, which in turn allows the fish population to rejuvenate itself, and ultimately it makes it a much more sustainable resource for us to deal with over time. Another important idea, of course, is the metabolic rift. This is where the economy robs from the land and society and ultimately prevents metabolic relationships between humankind and the earth. We are disconnected from the material means of our production, of our livelihood. We are disconnected from nature. We are told that we are no longer part of the natural cycle. Humans have elevated themselves above the overall nature which we draw off of to sustain ourselves. And quite possibly the grossest example of a metabolic rift, a disconnection between humanity and the natural resource base that ultimately feeds us, is being buried in a casket. If you die, your remains should return to the earth. The earth has sustained you throughout your life, and in our death, our bodies can then return to sustain the earth. But we as humans, or at least some of us as humans, steal the ability of the earth to reclaim the nutrients that we possess and have taken from the earth over time by encapsulating them in steel caskets. Not only do we take from the earth to create some casket, that's earthly materials, and those earthly materials are used to prevent our nutrients to returning back to the earth itself. Another example, uh, conventional farmers applying nutrients from elsewhere like phosphorus, which in the U.S. mainly comes from the mines in the Bone Valley of Central Florida. Um, uh, Phosphorus could be part of the growing process in and of itself if we did no-till um, agriculture, and we allow uh, the land itself to supply the nutrients that plants need over time. We wouldn't need things like phosphorus. And now the agricultural community that is very much reliant on uh, receiving phosphorus from places where phosphorus is becoming more scarce are now dependent on a rising price for phosphorus due to its scarcity. Something else to think about is the treadmill as a social process. Um, the treadmill ultimately is an outcome of interests of various social actors, their power, and their level of concern for others. Treadmills are not just external pressures that we must conform to, they're also due to pressures that come from within, um, or the ideal dimension. Couple of things to think about here in reference to this ideal dimension certainly come straight out of those doggone Protestants. First, the Protestant work ethic or hard work reflects positively on us. Um, this was referred to by Max Weber as the Protestant work ethic, and it has laid the foundations for how we in the United States structure work and why we have less vacation time than the rest of the Europeans that share similar styles of Western industrial life and livelihood. So hard work is what we're supposed to be at, not just laying around doing nothing. This is one of the reasons that the original folks that arrived here from Northern Europe thought that Native Americans were lazy, because once they accomplished the task that they needed to reproduce their social life on a daily basis, they were done. They would lay around, they would play games, they would have sex, they would do all kinds of leisure activities. And that was just horrible in reference to these Protestants that believed any waking moment we should be using to be productive. And that hard work is a moral virtue and laziness is immoral. So if you're lazy and laying around because you don't have anything to do, well, there's something wrong with you, folks. Those two dimensions end up placing us on this treadmill of consumption, which ultimately defines us over time and does not make us happy. Those lazy Native Americans were way happier than we were, folks. There's also a dialogue, of course, to treadmills of production and consumption. They work hand in hand. When you increase the pace of production, it ultimately increases the pace of consumption and vice versa. This process in and of itself needs profit to consume, and it needs to consume to demonstrate profit. These are two systems that work together intricately. And of course, ultimately, the treadmill of production and consumption create inequality. And so the cycle continues. This is a great diagram of what we're talking about here. You see one side where are the resources, the other side are the community, and everybody's running away from uh, the central set of gears that is essentially grinding up our resources. It's grinding up our community. And um, as you can see, it's grinding up humanity as well. Um, one of the things that I think went wrong in society is historically, if you thought of two terms, and one was an umbrella term, and then the other fell under that umbrella. The umbrella was society, and the term economy fell within the umbrella of society. I think we've got that reversed these days. Now the umbrella is the economy, and the society falls within that umbrella. And that's a real problem, folks. Economy has power over us. But that's power that we're giving it, because we actually have power over it as well. And as I began this lecture with, sometimes we forget that we possess that power, or we think that the exercising of that power is essentially too hard. But we as individuals can make a difference. We can make a difference by engaging in what is now referred to as the political economy, where politics and economics engage in discussions and dialogue with each other. But in order to change this debate, we as individuals have to accept that we can make a change, we can make a difference. We have to get in, engage in groups that are in turn trying to make a difference, which in turn hopefully will redistribute social power based on the moral vision of those involved, that are trying to counteract the conditions that exist today. Which in turn, if you have enough people to speak to power, it can create a bargaining space between these competing interests. And then, of course, once we see that involvement take shape, we're going to want the state to step in and litigate or create new legal mandates to protect this newfound interest that's being expressed by society. So there you have it, folks. Look at the video on the corporation. Make it through all of the information in section 3, and yeah, we're going to keep this going on. Hopefully you're feeling like you're understanding things a little bit more. You're seeing where sociology comes from in reference to environment and society itself. And yeah, we're going to keep unpacking this stuff as we move forward. But when it's all said and done, I think you're all going to look back and say, dang, I'm real happy I took that class.